Before the modern world was loud, fast, and endlessly connected, it was quiet, slow, and controlled by a few. Knowledge was not something you discovered. It was something you were allowed to access. Books were rare, expensive, and painstakingly copied by hand, page by page, word by word, often taking months or even years to complete. Literacy was limited, information moved at the speed of a horse, and ideas lived and died within the walls of monasteries, palaces, and elite institutions. Most people lived their entire lives without ever owning a single book, and because of that, the way people thought, questioned, and imagined the world was tightly constrained. But all of that was about to change. Quietly at first, almost invisibly. With ink, metal, and pressure, one invention would fracture the old world and ignite a chain reaction that still shapes everything we see today. In the early 15th century, Europe stood at a crossroads. Universities were growing, trade routes were expanding, and curiosity was rising. Yet the spread of ideas was painfully slow. A single handwritten Bible could cost as much as a house. Errors were common, copies were inconsistent, and knowledge degraded as it traveled. Control over information meant control over power, religion, and truth itself. Whoever decided what could be written and copied decided what the world was allowed to know. This fragile system had survived for centuries, not because it was efficient, but because there was no alternative. Until one man looked at the problem and imagined a machine that could replicate words with mechanical precision. Johannes Gutenberg did not set out to start a revolution. He was a metalworker, a tinkerer, a problem solver. What he created around 1440 was not a single invention, but a system. Movable metal type that could be rearranged endlessly, an oil-based ink that adhered cleanly to metal, and a press adapted from agricultural machinery that applied even pressure. Individually, these ideas were modest. Together, they were explosive. For the first time in history, text could be reproduced rapidly, cheaply, and consistently. A single press could produce hundreds of identical pages in the time it once took to copy one by hand. Information was no longer fragile. It was scalable. When the first printed books appeared, they looked almost identical to handwritten manuscripts. That was intentional. Gutenberg understood that radical change works best when it feels familiar. But beneath the surface, something unprecedented was happening. Words were becoming independent of institutions. Ideas could now travel without permission. A printer in one city could replicate the thoughts of someone thousands of kilometers away with near-perfect accuracy. Knowledge was beginning to detach itself from authority. The immediate effects were subtle, but unstoppable. Books became cheaper. Literacy slowly spread beyond clergy and nobility. Merchants, craftsmen, and eventually common citizens gained access to texts on law, science, religion, and philosophy. Once people could read, they could compare ideas. Once they could compare ideas, they could question them. And once questioning became widespread, the old monopolies on truth began to crumble. No institution felt this shock more violently than the church. For centuries, religious interpretation had flowed in one direction, from authority to believer. But the printing press reversed that flow. When Martin Luther's 95 Theses were printed and distributed across Europe, they spread faster than any sermon ever could. What might have remained a local dispute became a continental movement. Pamphlets, translations of the Bible into vernacular languages, and theological arguments flooded cities and towns. People no longer relied solely on intermediaries to tell them what Scripture meant. They could read it themselves. The Reformation did not happen because of the printing press alone, but without it, it could not have spread with such speed or intensity. At the same time, science was undergoing its own quiet awakening. Before print, knowledge was fragmented and often lost between generations. After print, discoveries could be recorded, preserved, and built upon. Scientists could replicate experiments described by others. Errors could be identified. Progress became cumulative. The works of Copernicus, Galileo, and later Newton did not remain isolated thoughts. They became shared reference points. The scientific revolution accelerated not just because of genius minds, but because those minds could finally speak to one another across time and distance. The printing press did something even more radical. It standardized reality. Before print, spelling, measurements, and even facts varied wildly from place to place. Printed texts fixed language. They stabilized grammar. They created shared definitions. Over time, this led to the formation of national identities, unified legal systems, and collective cultures. When people read the same texts, they begin to imagine themselves as part of the same story. As printing spread, so did newspapers, political pamphlets, and eventually public opinion itself. Rulers quickly realized that power could no longer be maintained solely through force. Ideas now mattered. Narratives mattered. Persuasion mattered. Revolutions were no longer confined to battlefields. They could begin on paper. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, and countless social movements were fueled by printed words that challenged the status quo and proposed new visions of society. But with this power came consequences. Misinformation spread alongside truth. Propaganda found a new weapon. Control over presses became a new battleground. Governments censored, licensed, and sometimes destroyed printing operations. Yet no matter how tightly authorities tried to control information, it kept slipping through. Once the machinery existed, it could not be uninvented. The printing press also reshaped the human mind. Silent reading became common. Private reflection replaced communal recitation. People developed deeper internal worlds. The way humans processed information changed. Linear thinking, long-form argumentation, and analytical reasoning flourished. Entire educational systems reorganized around printed material. Modern schooling, academia, and libraries are all descendants of this single breakthrough. As centuries passed, the press evolved. Steam-powered presses increased output. Rotary presses made newspapers ubiquitous. Literacy rates soared. Information became faster, denser, and more influential. By the time digital technology emerged, humanity was already conditioned to live in a world shaped by mass communication. The internet did not create the information age from nothing. It amplified a process that began with movable type. Here lies the true climax of the printing press's legacy. It did not merely spread knowledge, it redistributed power. It shifted authority from institutions to individuals. It created a world where ideas compete, collide, and evolve in public view. Every book you read, every article you scroll past, every post you share exists because someone once figured out how to press ink onto paper at scale. And even today, in a world of screens and algorithms, the core principle remains unchanged. Whoever controls the flow of information shapes reality. The printing press was the first machine to prove that truth could travel faster than tradition, and that once people gain access to knowledge, they rarely accept silence again. So the next time you read a sentence that changes how you think, remember this wasn't always possible. It took metal, pressure, ink, and a quiet revolution to make your curiosity normal. If this story made you see the modern world differently, leave a comment with your thoughts. If you want to explore more inventions that reshaped humanity from the ground up, subscribe to the channel. And if you believe understanding the past is the key to navigating the future, hit like and stay with us for what comes next.